Welcome, thank you for coming. There's a funny story that used to get told that describes the precise Germans and the fun, life-loving Italians. Back in World War II, when the Germans controlled northern Italy, a German captain had an Italian captain assigned to him for translation and helping with the population. And the German would always, like a good German always is, be there. He said his directions were be here at 7 in the morning in case something happens. He'd get there, the German would get there 15 or 30 minutes early. The Italian would get there 15 minutes late, 20 minutes late, smelling like espresso, the German tapping his watch saying, you're late, you're late. Eventually, the Italian starts coming a little later each day till the German gets mad and says, you're always late. And he asks, what's the problem? And he said, something might have happened. And he said, did something happen? He said, no. And he said, so what's the problem? And it's obviously a little bit of a stereotype, but just a little, if you know any Italians. And over the years, there have been many people who have attempted to define whole populations and their cultures and their habits. A nation is made up of a people with some similarities, and they have the same habits, manners of thinking, the culture. This is the cultural norms. You can try to grasp an understanding of the population's mind and soul, and there are some characteristics in a people that are innate, and the origin of those traits go back thousands of years. There's a belief in the internal Kung Fu system called Bagua Tren. It's similar to Tai Chi Chuan, regarding life energy, Qi energy, and it says, the Qi energy of one's motherland is strongest. That's your ancestral Qi. The Qi energy of one's motherland is strongest. The land, the water, and the air are drenched in the antiquity of your ancestors. The people's culture, language, and hearts were nourished and formed by the energy of the land. And they believe this, I believe this. And what a powerful creative energy the Italian peninsula emanated. Stereotypes and generalities of the Italian people abound, but one trait that is absolutely true is their love and devotion to art and beauty. Art is part of the Italian psyche and soul. So no one has epitomized this love and devotion to art like Michelangelo Buonarroti, at least as far as I'm concerned. I'm a Buonarroti fan my whole life. We even named our middle daughter Michelangelo. You see this in his work, and I think he's the greatest of the Italian peninsula's geniuses, and they have produced many. Michelangelo was that once in a millennium phenomenon. In humanity's history, there have been 3 major volcanic eruptions of artistic production. And one was in Paleolithic times, and you see this in like the cave paintings of Altamira, Spain, and Lascaux, France, and the Val Camonica petroglyphs in Italy. And these are just amazing what the first artists could draw, especially underground at night at torchlight. The second explosion of artistic eruption, of artistic creativity, was the ancient Greeks, right? And there are sculptures, mostly marble. There's not many bronzes in the world left from them. Very little painting exists except the Vase painting. So specifically the Vase painting, these painters were amazing. Their technical skill was a very high level, and they were very creative. A lot of these are depictions of athletes and mythological and heroism, but most of them had a lot of depictions of everyday life, so we learn a lot from them. There was the greatest artistic period in the Italian Renaissance. Now, I make a disclaimer here that I do believe all the world had artistic eruptions of art and contributed, right? But there were 2 places I believe gave the most amazing over periods, not just one, but many periods of time. And they were both across from each other, China and Italy. Greco-Roman and Italian in the peninsula and China, and so much came from there, high levels of artistic production. But my forte is Italian art. I'll stick to that. So Michelangelo Buonarroti was indeed the apex of the Italian Renaissance, who again epitomized the entire period. And people see Michelangelo and they think they know everything about Michelangelo. You know, oh, I've heard of him forever. He wants to talk about Michelangelo again. But when you look at architecture, sculpture, the paintings, you always see, and you can see and learn something new every single time you look at his work. It's like the emotional experience of like looking at a sunset daily. The sunset's always different. And I see Michelangelo again, the culmination that is all artistic genius. He was born for this. He was born for the purpose of creating art. That was his life. And he is the best representation of the Italian psyche, the Italian soul. Now, Michelangelo was born on March 6, 1475, in a beautiful little town called Caprese. This is his little house. It's Casa Buonarroti is now still there. It's a museum you could go visit in Caprese. Caprese is not far from an awesome little Renaissance town called Arezzo, which isn't far from Florence. Now, his family was noble, and they were on the decline over the generations. But his family, I believe his father was from Settignano, which is considered, so he's considered a Florentine, even though he was born in Caprese, which is important because Florence was one of the Renaissance centers. Now, his nursemaid was a stonecutter's wife. And he liked to muse, he liked the joke that my first nutrition had rock dust in it, marble dust, you know, from the stonecutter's wife. From the first nutrition was from her breast, stonecutter's wife. This is not actually his nursemaid. This is the Madonna of the Stairs, which one of the most elegant little sculptures that he made when he was 16 years old. This is in Casa Buonarroti. In 1488, he was apprenticed to Domenico Ghirlandaio, a really well-renowned artist with a bottega that was very vibrant. And this is a self-portrait by Ghirlandaio. He was, as an apprentice, now at 14 years old, he went in a little late, but as an apprentice, you don't learn fresco, you don't do fresco, you do the menial tasks, you'll clean the bottega, you prepare the walls for painting or the surfaces, you make brushes, you mix paints, and you learn to draw. So it was his first introduction, and he obviously was observant, and he was so smart. You know, he learned a lot just watching him paint the fresco. But he really didn't work in fresco here. He was there 1 year. First, let me show you this. That is the Battle of the Centaurs. Again, 16 years old. And you can see in this, so both were done at age 16, but here is different than the Madonna with the Stairs. And you can see in this, the bodies, you already see him forming the bodies and the twisting and the nudity. This is also in Casa Buonarroti. If you ever get to go, you can see that there. So he was removed at age 15 by Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo the Great, most powerful family in Florence at the time. And he was placed in his academy. It was a sculpture garden academy that he set up under the tutelage of an artist named Bertoldo di Giovanni, who was the last student of Donatello, the great Donatello. And this is important to note because there's a direct lineage from Donatello to Michelangelo through Bertoldo, even if it was a short influence. In this garden, they filled it with Greek and Roman copies of Greek statuary from antiquity so that the artist could sketch and draw and learn. And at age 16, he did the Madonna of the Stairs, the Battle of the Centaurs. He was a child prodigy and became the favorite of Lorenzo the Great. The atmosphere he was now placed in was a highly creative and intellectual atmosphere. And it's important because you can see how our minds can form at a young age if you get them surrounded. Can you imagine? He's surrounded by all the greatest minds, the greatest artists, the poets. And he was subjected to discussions and lessons from some of the greatest minds at the time, like Pico della Mirandola, and he studied Greek and Roman classics, the sculptures, the writings. He absorbed the deepest teachings of Neoplatonism and humanism, which are important. But he also was a very devout Catholic. He was a strong believer and had a level of theology. He was a theologian in his own right. So when he was commissioned to do the sealing by Julius II, Pope Julius II, he assisted him in putting that together, and he claims that he did that with artistic freedom. Not everyone believes that because it's so important. When you walk into the Sistine Chapel, it's like a living Bible, a walk-in picture book, you know? And it was so important because it was the conclave, not for laymen, but for clergy who picked the Pope, right? So some people are sure that cardinals and the Pope and other theologians would have had to have their say. But you can see his own mind at work in there, and you're going to see this. Due to time restraints, I'm going to skip over his long list of works. Mind you, he had a very serious work ethic and was very versatile. Not only an accomplished sculptor or painter, he was also an architect and a poet. He lived to be almost 90 and worked his whole life and made a tremendous body of work. One work I will briefly mention that catapulted him to fame was the David, which is 17 feet tall in the Accademia in Florence. This was carved out of a huge marble that an artist previously, they believe, damaged because he started carving into it and gave up on it. He abandoned the marble. Michelangelo saw it, and as a Neoplatonist, formed into thinking of the Neoplatonist, he could see the image in the body. He said he saw the form, you know, Plato, form. He saw the form, and all he had to do was free the form from the marble by chipping the marble away. He saw this, and this is pretty amazing when you look at the counterposition of that. He could actually fit that amazing, one of the most elegant, exquisite sculptures of a male figure. And note that David was always made effeminate and skinny. Here he's muscular, and we're going to point that out later about the way he did men and the saved. People who go to God are like the ultimate image of God, and not little and skinny, but muscular and athletic, warrior-like the Greeks depicted them. So he was taking Greek sculpture antiquities and making it his own. He made it modern. He wasn't a slave to the past. He thought sculpturally, not like a painter. This helped him when he was commissioned to do the Sistine ceiling. He never really worked in fresco technique, that is, painting with pigment into wet plaster. One interesting note regarding cultural property protection before I go on to the chapel. During World War II, a group of Italian art professionals worked tirelessly to protect the nation's artistic patrimony. They moved 11,139 pieces of artwork from where it rested in the Tuscan city of Florence to the Tuscan villas and other cities too, into the countryside, so that the Nazis wouldn't steal them. Michelangelo's colossal David was encased in brick, and so were the other sculptures there. They looked like silos, and they were filled with sand, so that if the ceilings fell in, like almost happened in the other city, to the Last Supper, which they also saved with sand and protection, but the rest of the building fell down. So here's a look at what they did. That was a lot of work, filled with sand. Here is the David. Italians take great lengths to protect their artistic cultural patrimony. It's written into their constitution. Title 9 of their constitution, post-war, 1947, states that they must protect and defend their artistic and cultural property and their landscape. And now they added ecology and biodiversity, for an interesting note. But they've had cultural property laws going back for years, back as far as 1939, 1909, and also an edict of 1820 from the Papal States to protect cultural property. And they still use those laws to get things back when they're stolen or smuggled out. So this is just an example. You can see that art is part of the Italian blood. It is, in modern parlance, in the DNA. One other little note before we move on, which is interesting. Another cultural property side note. These images, such as the David, and what we're going to look at, the hands of God in creation, and also Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, have become iconic images, and the Italian government claimed a sort of copyright protection on them, and they won 2 cases. Now these are artworks that are hundreds of years old in museums, but they still claim copyright on them and won 2 cases, one in Italy and one in Germany. Doubtful they'd win here. This one with the Italian GQ and the model, they won that one, and they won one with a German company that used Vitruvian Man to make a puzzle. And the laws, they claim, are to protect from the banalization of their culture. Other countries like in England and the United States say they're absurd, but what they say is that they claim copyright authority over the commercial use of them without permission, but do allow fair use standard for educational purposes of the images. Only you have to ask permission if they're gonna make money. But I thought you might find that interesting because of copyright laws. At one point you can use images and they're saying, no, this is, 1500s, but you still can't use that if you make it look like that. So the Sistine Chapel isn't much to look at on the outside unless you like forts and fortresses and that kind of architecture. It was built between the years of 1473 and 1481 at the behest of Pope Sixtus IV, who was from the powerful Delle Rovere family of Liguria. The architect was Baccio, they believe was Baccio Pontinelli, if you're interested, but the chapel was built, and that's why it's called Sistine Chapel. It's after him, Pope Sixtus IV. The chapel was built by the strategic and thinking military architects and appears like a fortress on the outside. They were prone to siege of enemy armies, and eventually you did have the sack of Rome in 1527, but this was a way of life in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And that's where they go to pick the Pope. That's the conclave, right? So they wanted even the Pope lives in Castel Sant'Angelo, which is a fortress, right? Many people mention upon visiting this when they go inside. When you go inside, it's an explosion of artwork. It's just the most amazing. It's just like Michelangelo's the epitome of. This is the epitome, I think, of chapels, right, and churches. But when they walk in, they say, I thought it would be bigger, but this is, again, a chapel. It's not St. Peter's Basilica or a church. It is actually a rather large chapel. It's 118 feet long, 46 feet wide, and 66 feet high. So Michelangelo painted that whole ceiling with 66 feet high, and he did it on scaffolding. There is this legend that he laid on his back with a candle on his hat. He actually was standing up, which is worse because his head was cranked and he was like this for 4 years. And this affected his health. Head cranked, it's humid, it's hot, it's cold. He's 33, he's still a young man, but that's a lot of work to deal with in harsh conditions. And it affected his health for the rest of his life, especially his eyes, because he was working at candlelight. Hopefully you all visit the chapel at one point in your life, or if you have already, you go back. Please take your time to walk in there and take it in, starting with this amazing floor you see here, which is a Cosmatesque floor done in little mosaic, and it is the first amazing artwork that was done in this chapel. Many people naturally walk in and their heads get cranked to the ceiling, and they start spinning around and they're looking up and they're looking, and then they get whisked out and it's all over. And they walk on that floor, they don't even see the floor or what's on the sides, because it was painted in layers. You wait to get in there. Don't let that happen to you. Walk in, look at the floor. Here's the rood screen. This is marble. This is beautiful. This separated the layman from the clergy. This was as far as laymen got to go back then. And you see it's painted in layers. This is damask drapery painted along both sides. An interesting note, a lot of people think that they were totally trying to be like the temple in Jerusalem, which maybe, because they were always trying to say Rome's the New Jerusalem. But that Pope lived in Assisi. He was there most of his life, Sixtus IV. And there's a lot of the same in the cathedral there for St. Francis. You see a lot of the same, including the drapery. So he might have just been going for what he was used to. But this is damask drapery decorated in silver and gold thread. Then you raise your eyes to these 12 frescoes here done from 1480 to 1482. Again, Pope Sixtus IV. And these get neglected. Like, people don't really look at them. They go up, they look, and they leave. So, floor, transept, drapery, 12 panels that depict the life of Moses and the life of Christ. So, I shouldn't get off script, but I got to tell you this because it's really interesting. When there was the Pazzi conspiracy, the Pazzi family wanted to eliminate the Medici. There was a conspiracy that the Pope was involved with. When they were in church at Santa Maria del Fiore, the big Duomo in Florence, that they were when they held up the host for communion, that was the sign. Giuliano, the brother of Lorenzo the Great, Lorenzo and the whole family, even their bodyguards, got down on their knees. So their bodyguards who were there to protect them were pretty tough guys, got down on their knees. Because it's God, right? The conspirators run up, and their plan was to kill both brothers. They got Giuliano, they didn't get Lorenzo. He got up into the church, got to a balcony, and showed everyone who was still alive, and the town went crazy. Now, if they would have succeeded, they would have seized power. But, and this is how crazy things are. Do it, don't get caught. Make sure you're successful. They weren't. They all died. They got hung, they got stabbed, So the Pope got mad and excommunicated Lorenzo the Great. Eventually, he lifted the excommunication. Now, for those of you who aren't Catholic, that doesn't mean you get kicked out of the church completely. It's kind of like a timeout. It's like sit in the corner with the dunce hat on. He lifted the excommunication, and Lorenzo was so grateful that he lifted it, he sent the greatest artist he had in his service there to help him paint these frescoes. So you have Perugino, Botticelli, Rosselli, Ghirlandaio, who was the first master of Michelangelo, remember, but Michelangelo at this point was only like 5 or 6 years old. You had Signorelli. On the southern wall are scenes of the life of Moses. On the northern wall are scenes of the life of Christ. So the decision to show the scenes of Moses and Christ across from one another was with the purpose of showing the continuity of the Old and New Testaments, the Old and New Covenant between God and man, the law of Moses and the Holy Spirit that came with Christ. Everything in this Sistine artistic universe speaks together and has a message. There's a meaning to everything. Nothing random. This is a grand artistic collaboration. So that's how you have to view it, like one big collaboration. Pietro Perugino was the most prestigious artist and was sort of in charge, but so was Botticelli. For unity, they created a line. You can see it here in the computer image throughout all of the panels, so that all of the horizons and all of the perspective looks like one hand touched it. And all of the figures are the same dimensions. So it looks like the same hand was at work and that the same designer was designing. They worked together in collaboration. These frescoes talk to each other. They communicate to us a message of a root of salvation from Old Testament to New. And that was the purpose, that when they locked them in here to pick a pope, they have all of this telling them many, many messages. And things could get pretty political when they pick a pope. But this is an environment they're still locked into, looking at these. So now on the southern wall, Pietro Perugino, The Journey of Moses. This is a beautiful painting. And here we have Sandro Botticelli, The Trial of Moses. So please note this little dog being held right there. There's a cool story to the little dog. Cosimo Rosselli, Crossing the Red Sea, a very powerful painting. And again, the little white dog. Cosimo Rosselli, The Tablets of the Law. And again, the dog drinking water. Here's Botticelli. And this is an important one. The Punishment of Korah. This was when Moses wanted to hand his authority to Aaron, his brother. And the Korah family got upset. And they protested. And there was going to be a sacrifice. And God was angry and sucked them into the earth. Look at this arch. And it's falling apart, and everything's bad. They're sucked in the earth, the arch is falling apart, the bricks are falling down. When things don't go smooth in the passing of authority, things get bad. This is a message. It's right across from the handing of the St. Peter's keys, and I'll show you that in a minute. Here's Luca Signorelli, Moses, Punishment, and Death. So this is Signorelli. Notice this nude in the middle of everything. This is important because Signorelli was one of the first in the Renaissance to really explore the nude figure. And he influenced Michelangelo. And this is his last judgment in the damned being brought to hell in the cathedral in Orvieto. And I'll show you a close-up of it here. So you can see, like the Battle of Centaur of Michelangelo, what you'll see in his Last Judgment, this one you can see the twisting nude figures and the violence and the work there. Now on the northern wall, the life of Christ, baptism of Jesus. You see a lot in this, including Perugino. It's common, the lovely Umbrian landscapes. But there's a lot to see here. You got St. John the Baptist and Jesus preaching to the people. You have the baptism of Christ with the Holy Spirit. But the lovely Umbrian landscape is stunning. Like, this is one nice thing about all these Renaissance paintings and the way they do their landscapes and the castles and the people in the background. All right, Botticelli, the temptation of Jesus. Here you got a lot going on. You have many scenes of the temptation of Jesus where he was fasting and he's being tempted by the devil to make bread out of the stones. He's up on top of the Temple of Jerusalem. This beautiful church is the Temple of Jerusalem, it's supposed to be. And he's saying, here's all the kingdoms, you can have them, follow me. And throw yourself down, the angels will save you, and he shooed him away. This is a leper that he saved, and he's presenting himself to the high priest. But I want to show you this cardinal right here, because this is interesting. This is how important this was to this family. So Botticelli painted in Julius della Rovere, who, into this scene, who was the nephew of Pope Sixtus IV, but a cardinal at the time. He would later become Pope Julius II, who would commission the vault of the Sistine Chapel with Michelangelo. This chapel was very important to this family. Here's Ghirlandaio's calling the first disciples, a really another nice painting with a beautiful landscape, almost looks like a Da Vinci, no? And Peter's in gold, Andrew's in green. Here is Rosselli's Sermon on the Mount, and this is Jesus giving guidelines for good Christian living, across from the fresco of Rosselli's depiction of Moses receiving the tablets of the law. So see how it always ties in, Old Testament, New Testament. Here is what the Pope probably thought was the most important painting, because it talks about his authority. Perugino's handing over of the keys. This depicts from the verse Matthew 16:18, where Jesus proclaims he will hand Peter the keys to heaven, and all the apostles are around him, including the greatest known rat in history, Judas Iscariot, who you can tell by the money bag, and he's darker and uglier. You know, I forgot to tell you, this is important. Let me go back. This church is an actual church in Italy. It's the Chapel of Santa Maria in Traspontina of the Church of Santo Spirito in Sassia. So, and it's such well made, and it's important because they are always trying to combine Jerusalem with Rome. Rome's the New Jerusalem. The Pope is the head of the church. And in this one, with the handing of the keys, this temple is also beautiful, but it's imaginary, and that probably was influenced by Leon Battista Alberti's on architecture, like the perfect kind of chapel. But here are two arches, right, in perfect condition. Two arches as compared to the one with the Cora family getting sucked into the earth. And here everything is smooth. It's a nice harmony, and they're right across from each other. And this is telling the people picking the Pope in the conclave, Cora went bad, crumbling arch. This one went well, you know. So when you pick the Pope, if you argue and you fight and it goes on and on and on, things can go bad. It's sending that message. If you smoothly pick the Pope, and you know, there's harmony and there's peace. And here is Perugino painted himself in right here. That's Perugino right here. Rosselli, Last Supper, which is an interesting one because they're all behind the table. Only Judas is on this side. No food is on the table. There is the chalice and the bread that Judas is he's gonna get from Jesus, and everyone's gonna know he's the rat. There's that dog again. Interesting about the dog is that, like they paint themselves in their self-portraits, which is kind of cool. They put themselves in there. That dog was just some wild dog that entered when they arrived and was there for 2 years and became their mascot. And they painted him into all these frescoes, and he became a famous dog for eternity. But Rosselli wasn't one of the most favorite artists of the time, but this Pope liked him. So he was in this group with the biggest of, and he was big, but he wasn't as accomplished. But this is a pretty nice one with a lot of gold. And he put in the windows here, you're looking out the window at 3 different scenes of the Passion. Here's the garden, here's the kiss of Judas, and here's the crucifixion. So again, these are that one layer done in 1480 to 1482, but you have to look at them closer to really enjoy that. You're looking at the greatest artist of the Renaissance, and people walk in and don't even look. Most people don't even care. They just want to see the ceiling and leave. So the next layer is popes. They have a layer of popes. A lot of them are martyrs. You can always tell a martyr because they carry a palm brand. That's Pope Sixtus IV. They believe that the apprentices, the assistants of the artist, especially Botticelli, painted these popes. And the next layer is where Michelangelo starts his work. So this was 1480 to 1482. So the next layer is the ancestors of Christ. And this is one example. This is the grandparents of Jesus, Jacob. Here is the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and a tough little new Jesus, which is pretty interesting. Here is the entire ceiling completed by Michelangelo. He was 33 years old when he started this, again 66 feet high. He painted 6 rectangular frescoes in the middle, and that's scenes of the Old Testament of the creation. This is a huge picture book Bible. You walk in and you see it all, from creation to fall to salvation and the Last Judgment. In 1508, he had assistants arrive from Florence who helped him, because again, he wasn't a painter, he was a sculptor. He wasn't that adept at fresco, but he swiftly learned the technique and he sent them all away. He painted almost 80% of this by himself. He must have had someone mixing the paint, because the artist wouldn't do that, it's too much work. But the painting part, the work part, he did himself. People didn't believe that until the Restoration years later, under Pope John Paul II's papacy in the 1980s. They went up there and the restorers said, it looks like one hand did over 80% of the ceiling. He did this over 4 years with a brief break because he had an argument with the Pope, and the Pope hit him in the head. The Pope was the warrior Pope. He went into battle with his troops. He was a tough guy. He hit him in the head. Michelangelo wasn't going to put up with it. He ran away, and it's a very courageous thing to flee a Pope and to flee a commission from a Pope. It's dangerous. It could make you have a really bad day. The Pope loved him, so instead of getting angry, he sent messengers to him, and appeased him and lured him back to finish this job. One way he appeased him was, more money, I'll pay you, So this is what the ceiling looked like before Michelangelo painted it. It was originally done by an artist named Pier Matteo d'Amelia. This is a contractual drawing that is on view at the Met in room 889. You can go see this in person there. It's on loan from the Uffizi. And he did a blue sky, the universe, blue sky with stars. So here is a drawing done. And this is what Michelangelo saw when he walked in there for the first time. Floor, everything's the same. But right here, you had no ancestors, and he saw the stars, right? So this is notable for me, because when I was in the U.S. Navy, I was stationed my entire enlistment in the Mediterranean Sea, the Com-6 Fleet Mediterranean Command. And while I see in the middle of the Med, I like to go topside, and at night you could see the entire Milky Way. On clear nights, you could see the entire Milky Way in the middle of the sea. It looks like a National Geographic photo. You could never believe it, unless you've been out at sea or been in the desert or something. You see that. It's breathtaking. It's a breathtaking experience that causes a really strong emotional response. I would be up there all night, and then you see zillions of stars, shooting stars all night, right? The entire Milky Way. So when I stood under Michelangelo's ceiling for the first time, I had that same emotional response, and it's like looking at the Milky Way. I said it then, I say it today. When you stand under his ceiling, it's like looking at the Milky Way. Then when I discovered that prior to Michelangelo painting the ceiling in 1508, that Pier Matteo d'Amelio had painted some stars on the ceiling, it kind of hinted to a mystical cosmic order of things, you know? That those stars were there, and that's the first feeling I got from it. He started on the other side. He started backwards. He started with Noah, but this is the first in the story because it's like a storybook. This is separation of light from darkness. God separating light from darkness. And you see, he painted in all the architecture. He was a sculptor and an architect. That's how he thought. That's what made him. So the Pope forced him to do this. He didn't want to do it. He thought he was being set up by Bramante, the architect of the Pope, because they were rivals, and he thought he'd either refuse and be in bad shape with the Pope, or have a bad relation with the Pope, or he'd do it and mess it up, or do something mediocre. The Pope said, I want you to do 12 apostles on that huge ceiling, 12 apostles. He wasn't having anything mediocre. He came back with this, and he claims he designed it all himself without the theologians. So, but obviously he did do most of it, because here are the annuity and the medallions and the architecture, and he fitted in just perfect. So here is creation of sun and the moon. Now a lot of tourists go in there and laugh because God's sticking his rear end at us, right? And that's what they, look at that big rear end. But this is biblical, because in the Old Testament, in the Jewish scriptures, no one was allowed to see God. You weren't even allowed to say his name. They'd say like Adonai or things that meant, but you couldn't say God's name. You couldn't see God. So you couldn't see God. The only one who saw God was Moses from behind like this. And if you remember, they even hinted at it in the I think it was Charlton Heston did Moses. When he came down from the mountain, they said he was white-haired, and they said he saw God. You know, he saw him from behind. Michelangelo was the first one to be bold enough to say, this is what God looked like. This is the creation of the sun and the moon. And he painted his face. Now, no one's ever, and this way, depiction was stuck in people's minds in the Western world for centuries. This is, he showed you what God looked like, an artist, a man. And it's funny because there was a joke that a cardinal walked in and said, no one's ever seen God. What are you doing? We don't know what God looks like. And he looked at him and boldly said, wait till I'm done. Then you'll see what God looks like. Wait till I'm done. So this kind of creative audacity, you got to think nowadays it doesn't mean anything to us, right? We're in this century. Back then, this was the first man to paint God's face. Like, this is what God looked like, and it stuck. So this audacity helped in the transition of society's perception of the artist as a genius instead of a mere dusty, dirty workman, like a Perseus who gets tortured by Zeus for giving man fire or knowledge, or like a man, an artist who shares that little bit of creative force of the mighty creator of the universe. So it was very audacious of him. Here's God separating heaven from earth. Remember, he's going around creating all these things saying, and it was good, and it was good. So these are powerful images to them. Now, the creation of man. A lifeless looking Adam, lifeless, waiting for that touch, that famous touch. In this, they're not touching. He's keeping you in suspense. They're just about to touch. He's lifeless. If you could see, and they could see when they restored it, that his eyes were glazed over with milky white. He's the perfect example of created in God's image, the perfect body, but he doesn't have that spark in him yet, right? But he's not a lazy blob. He's actually an athletic, a warrior, the divine, made in the image of God, just waiting for that life energy, and very interesting about this, because that became the iconic image of the Western world, right? This right here is the iconic image of the Western world. One note is that those two fingers aren't painted by Michelangelo. A lot of people don't notice. But unfortunately, see this crack here started getting worse and worse. And right after he died, this part broke off and fell 66 feet to the floor. They had an artist redo the fingers. So a lot of people don't know that that is not, it was Domenico Carnevale who painted those fingers, if you are into the little details. But a lot of people don't know that. They were horrified, like, oh, you know, but that's such an important part. And here is important too, because first of all, Eve is under God's arm, right? Watching her future lover get created, watching her future partner in this grand creation of humanity that they're about to take part of. They're at creation together. Michelangelo never made the woman second place. They were together from creation. She was already part of creation. And what a lot of people point out, and a lot of people argue that it's not true, it could never be true, but Michelangelo did a lot of dissection. This looks like a human brain. And a lot of neurologists even say, this looks like the mind of God. The mind of God, there's even the stem, right? And Michelangelo is smart enough to do that, right? Maybe he didn't, maybe it was a coincidence. A lot of people don't believe in coincidence when it comes to a genius like this. This looks like a brain. Eve is present. Here is Eve being created out of Adam's ribs while he sleeps. Again, a beautiful nudity. People love them in nudity. This is a beautiful one. So here you have two scenes depicted in this rectangle. The temptation in the garden and the expulsion from the garden. So in this garden, and this is notable, so he was really good at depicting nude males. He really didn't do women well. He wasn't good at painting or sculpting women. Some of them actually look kind of ugly. The man looked divine, right? But this is one of his most beautiful, and that face that was in the mind of God, I think the most beautiful woman he's painted. And people say, you know, oh, she's so muscular, he made her like a man. No, he made them both young and strong and full of life and with regal bearing. There was a reason why he depicted people like this, because they are like angels, right? What would St. Michael look like? What would an archangel look like? They look like that. They in his mind, you know. He studied those Greek statues, right? So he saw these perfect images of what the Greeks thought was the perfect male and women. So this is important because in this, he never really places the blame on the woman. He's advanced in his thinking. You see here, the woman is, like in most art of the time, the woman gets tempted and she tempts him. And she gets the blame. Here, she's being tempted by the devil. This is not an apple tree, by the way. He's Italian, it's a fig tree. She's reaching for the fig from the tempter, but he's reaching for his own at the same time, right? For his own. And this is important because they were together from their creation. They were tempted together. They fell together. They were expelled from the garden together, and they died together. Right? Everything. They're always together in this. That's Michelangelo. So that definitely was him designing this without theologians. And he painted her beautiful, strong, and here though they're looking young and beautiful in the garden. Here they're in a barren landscape now, one that has to be worked to produce fruit and food. And they both got old fast and one day closer to death when they got expelled. So there's a moral to this story. Make your decisions as wisely as you can. Here is the sacrifice of Noah. Here is the deluge. So now again, he started backwards. He started with Moses closer to the altar. But the story starts here with God. And he was still learning the fresco technique. He was still figuring it out. So I'll show you, the first one was the drunkard of Noah. This is the second one he did. And you can see when he did these two, there's a lot going on. This is a beautiful painting, a beautiful conception, right? And he went down and looked up at both after it was done and realized they're hard to see from the floor. So he started getting really fast good at this technique, and also started making his images larger so that they can be seen better. And he was really good at figuring this out. He was a master at foreshortening, and he used it in this ceiling. There's a lot going on here when you look close. You have the ark, there's Noah. You're not going to see this so much while you're in there. There's the dove. There's a man trying to save his son. The damned are trying to get up the higher ground. There's some really interesting things going on here. People climbing trees to get away from the water. Here, if you see this damage, an annuity and part of this got damaged. In the late 1700s, in the Castel Sant'Angelo, the Pope's residence, there was a gunpowder explosion. And it blew out. The only natural light coming in here is a few windows above. And it blew out all the windows, and it made this piece fall down. But in that era, no one was bold enough. No one thought they could take Michelangelo's place. No one dared go up there and try to paint Michelangelo. And they left it like that. And it does have some historical meaning now, some historical value that we look at it and we can discuss it. Just like they painted drapes on some of the nudes, and they allowed them to remove some in the restoration. They left some for historical reason, but it was Counter-Reformation stuff. The nudes on the altar we're going to talk about really bothered them at that time. They had left that Renaissance thinking and went into Reformation, Counter-Reformation thinking. So here is drunkenness of Noah. This is man's lowest point. Again, we got kicked out of the garden. And then Noah, who saved us all on his ark because he was a good man, but then he starts growing grapes, drinking wine, and became a drunken mess, right? So this is the last scene, and it is actually creation to us making many mistakes in God's eyes to last judgment, right? Again, God, but you have Jeremiah the prophet, because there's a bunch of prophets and there's a bunch of sibyls, and the architectural work he worked into it. So this Sibyl here, this beautiful Sibyl, is the Libyan Sibyl. They always tried, so you had prophets, Jewish prophets and these Greek Sibyls, and they always tried to tie them in, and they always tried to show that they were always foreseeing the life of Christ coming. So they were always trying to say this is the temple of Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, the prophets, the Sibyls, they all saw the coming of Christ. She was the daughter of Zeus and foretold the coming of a day when all that was hidden from humankind would be revealed. This is the Delphic Sibyl, one of the most lovely. And she foretold the coming of the great prophet born of a virgin who would be pure in heart. So when they read this, they said, oh, she's talking about Jesus. And this is why the pagan Delphic, the pagan Sibyls ended up on this ceiling. The colors of her robe were stunning. Right? And before the restoration in the 1980s, no one knew that he had used color like this. When they restored it, and that was John Paul II insisted on doing this restoration. It cost $11 million, which was a lot of money back then in the 80s, you know? And they realized as the colors start coming to life, it was covered always in a grime and a patina of grime and candle smoke. They thought it was that he was a darker type of, but instead, these are stunning colors that he uses here. The next one kind of shows you what they mean about his depiction of women. This is the Cumaean Sibyl, and she's ugly. She's got a small head, big body, man's arms, big breasts that don't fit the body of a man but this is interesting, especially to me, that Cumaea was a Greek colony in Magna Graecia that was built on top of Campi Flegrei, where this Sibyl, Cumaean Sibyl lived there on top of the volcano Campi Flegrei, right north of Vesuvius. And here is, so this is the Italian Sibyl, so here is Cumae, there's Naples right down below it, and here is Rome, and here is our beloved Gaeta, and they're very close to the Cumaean Sibyl. So that one I find very interesting. Now there's a lot on this ceiling. You know, there's a lot above the windows. That's the ancestors. There's the corners on all four corners. There's a lot to look at, not just what I'm showing you. But this is Jonah and the fish, and I wanted to show it because it's interesting. It's actually nice fish, but odd. This is the last figure he painted when he did the ceiling. It's the largest, but for them, Jonah and the fish had a real message that paralleled the life, the death and resurrection of Christ. He got swallowed, he got out of the fish. Christ went down into the earth, 3 days, came out. He looks like he's leaning backwards. He was so good at foreshortening, he's actually leaning frontwards, and it's the largest figure he painted in the chapel. So it's very interesting the work he did. Here's an example of the annuity. It's exquisite. And again, this was his forte. And you could see he was influenced by Signorelli. Not the greatest influence, right? Because he was influenced by everything in his life in that intellectual and artistic atmosphere. And this is, again, his idea of, and you'll see it on the Last Judgment wall now, none of the saints, none of the apostles, no one goes to heaven in robes and clothes. They're all nude. You don't need clothes. You're now you're now as God created you. That was his philosophy. This is one of the pendentives I told you all the corners have. This is interesting. But there's four, and they're very interesting, holophony and different. But here you have when God sent down to the Hebrews when they were going to march into the Holy Land. He sent down snakes and a plague, and they had to look at the saved, the ones who repented for rebelling against God, had to look at the bronze snake. But it's here, so this is how you see it. Here's our ultimate last judgment here, and this is the corner. So here on the altar wall is Judizio Universale, the last judgment done from 1534 to 1541. It was commissioned by Pope Clement the Seventh. Michelangelo did this 25 years after he painted the Sistine ceiling, and he was 57 years old when he started, which is old back then. 57, you're almost 60, you're old back then. And now this was much harder for him. Even though he's not up on the ceiling, he had to get up on the scaffold on this huge wall. And again, in that heat, in that cold, high humidity in Rome, it's rough, and especially in the summer. But he did work till he was 90. So he was really something, man, like health-wise and strength-wise. This was painted right after the sack of Rome in 1527 by the mutinous troops of Emperor Charles V. And there was desperation, there was despair. You know, the mood was down, Rome was sacked. And you could see it in this, and he was getting old, and he was thinking now more of his death and the sin that he thought he had. He was always hard on himself, and this comes out in this. The feel and look are different than the ceiling. There's not as many bright colors, although there's nice color. There are no frames or architecture painted in here. Now, in the ceiling, he didn't use much ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is made with lapis lazuli, which is very rare and very expensive. It comes from Afghanistan. Here it is in abundance. That is an expensive wall back then. It's even more expensive now. But so, and these are just to point out, he used that abundance of blue, and they were all nude except the Virgin. They painted on drapes later. Now here is Jesus in the middle. You got cross. I'm going to show this to you. Pillar, Jesus, Mary, and around them are the first group of saints and apostles, all nude, because that's how you go to God. Now here, you see his Jesus is an athlete, like a Greek athlete, a warrior, an athlete, you know, the same way they would depict someone coming back from Troy or from the Olympics. This is Mother Mary. Hundreds of years before Seurat, and they didn't notice until the Restoration in the 1980s, hundreds of years before Seurat invented pointillism, he did his own version of pointillism on this. The only figure done like that in here, you can't tell it from the ground. They didn't know until they went up there to restore it. It's thousands of little dots, and it's beautiful. And this chapel is dedicated to Mary. This is an interesting note. She's very important in the grand scheme of things. And the creation of Eve, I should have told you this when I passed that one. The creation of Eve out of Adam's ribs is the center part, done on purpose, very center of the entire ceiling, because they consider Mary the new Eve. So it all ties in, these messaging. Here, again, you can see these are the saints and the apostles. You can tell some of them, like this is a big key held by St. Peter. This is St. Bartholomew. St. Bartholomew is really interesting. Well, here's the cross up in one corner with the angels. His angels don't have wings. They don't need wings to fly. They don't have halos. Here's St. Bartholomew. St. Bartholomew, when he was martyred, was skinned alive. Later on, not right away, later on, and they compared it to some writings he did, they realized that Michelangelo put his face on the skin. There's two reasons. One, everyone was criticizing him and it hurt his feelings. They were criticizing him now because you're in a different age. The church is reforming. Europe's reforming. The nudity's not accepted anymore. They were saying it's vulgar. It's not even holy. You know. You see these whips of cloth. That was from afterwards. After he died, they had Daniela Volterra, who was a friend of his, actually paint these wisps of cloth on, which was horrible. But not all of them got covered, but lots of figures in this got wisps of cloth. This was a nude at the time. And during the restoration, they gave permission to remove some. Like they decided which ones to remove, which not to, because there is historic value now to this story. He was so upset, especially from the poet Pietro Aretino, who, you know, he had a pen that was as mighty as the sword, that they kept attacking him. So he felt skinned, he put his face on there, but it also has to do with, he really was thinking about his coming death, and he wanted to be saved, and he felt like he needed to shed the old him. Now here, you see the damned getting dragged down to hell by the angels. And it's interesting because he got criticized for this too, by a lot of the cardinals, a lot of theologians, because these angels are violently punching and kicking and throwing them down. You see the punches and kicking. And again, now you can see from the Cathedral in Orvieto, there is a little bit of influence, although Michelangelo's nudes were much more exquisite. Here is a close-up from that, and you can see one man that's damned for eternity, and you can see the look on his face like he sees what's coming, and these demons are joyfully dragging him down, a snake's biting him on the leg. He knows what's coming. Here, on the other hand, these aren't angels. These are saved humans helping other humans to salvation. And this is a very Christian message, that we help each other. We help each other in life, we help each other to salvation. And they're pulling each other up. They're helping each other get up, you know. And this is a very interesting as his depiction of Eve and Adam. This person has a rosary. He's helping two people, pulling them up with the rosary beads. This is a white European. This is an African man. Already in the 1500s, Michelangelo said, this is a universal salvation. This message is for the world. And he was very advanced in this messaging. These are trumpeters, the angels trumpeting the dead to wake up from the graves. Here is the ground level. That cross was here. This is on this side. And they're coming out of their graves. Some were freshly put in there. You see some skeletons coming out, and they're being helped up by the angels. Now this is an interesting part, the other side. Here's Charon, who was the oarsman, the boatman. He would ferry the people across to Hades when they died in Greek mythology. He was the oarsman, but this shows the influence of Dante. Dante Alighieri was very important to everyone in Florence at the time. And Dante describes Charon as an old man with a beard swinging an oar to get him off his boat. This is Minos. This is the most important and probably best loved. And this is the last image I'm going to show you. I didn't mean to rush through that. I don't want to take too long though, because then we can have question and answers. This is probably one of the most humorous and most loved on that altar wall, at least. So Minos was once the king of Crete. He's the one who threw the virgins into the labyrinth to get eaten by the Minotaur. When he died, he became the king of Hades. So there was Biagio, there was the master of ceremonies in the Vatican when Michelangelo was painting this was Biagio da Cesena, and he would come in constantly badgering them and criticizing them about the nudity and the theology and the vulgarity, and Michelangelo really got upset. He's the one who upset him the worst. So he painted him into hell, depicted him as Minos with donkey ears and a snake wrapped around him biting off his penis.
Yeah.
But cool, he went to Pope Clement VII, was furious. Went to Pope Clement VII, and this is why you don't mess with artists, because Michelangelo was pretty brave. He'd run from the Pope, he'd do this, and then he went to Pope Clement VII, who found it amusing, and he said he insisted that he make him paint that out and take that off, and Pope Clement VII informed him, while I have the authority on earth, I have no authority in heaven or hell, so I can't help you with this one. So it's still there today. The famous art critic and art historian Vittorio Scarpi stated that one of Michelangelo's most profound messages that he relayed in his art was that God exists. God exists. For Michelangelo, God was the ultimate artist, the creator of all the universe. God created the real Milky Way in the blink of an eye. The human artist can only spend 4 years attempting to create a simulated Milky Way on the ceiling. But we are sure that Michelangelo, the artist who was bold enough to show us what he believed God looked like for the first time, felt immense pride as an artist that he too could create heavenly, celestial masterpieces in the service of that grand creator. He held a profound belief that by creating art, he was fulfilling his duty to God's kingdom and performing a service to God. And he really believed that. He woke up in the morning and worked from morning to night, and all he thought about was work, work, work. And he was in the service of God by creating art. Thank you for joining me this evening.
Since you alluded to it several times, and I think in somewhat of a positive way, and you've also alluded to historical significance of these things, at the time that they did it, there was a lot of controversy, a lot of negative thoughts about the cleaning of the ceiling back in 35, 40 years ago.
Yes.
A lot of negative.
Always in restoration.
Negativity. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on that whole situation are.
So always in restoration, there's always has been controversy. And years ago, they weren't that good at it. And it's always, even say with a painting, when they restore a work, how much do you restore? How much does the restorer get to do before it's no longer Vincent Van Gogh and now it's the restorer's work, you know? But the Italian restorers who did the ones who did that were the best there were, and now they're really good at it. Here, there, they're really good at it. So that was John Paul II insisted it be done. He wanted that done for the world, because whether you're Christian or Jewish, or people were going there from all over the world to see it and enjoy it, and he said that's like a gift he wanted to give, but they had to raise $11 million. But they took a painstaking amount of time and energy to do it properly. So when they did that, no one knew his color schemes. No one knew how, you're really looking at his personality and how, and even the theology, like what he was trying to say, it's so different than seeing a dark, grimy, darker, now look at that, like the Libyan Sibyl with the green and the orange, beautiful. So I am happy they did it. We see him in a different light.
Well, it's the way it was originally painted.
We
also.
didn't know him until that, right? It's like you didn't even know him.
One of the things also, I think, was, you mentioned the money, it was a lot of money, I think, that came from, as I recall, a Japanese television company that paid for a lot.
Yeah, they bought some rights.
Yeah,
They bought some rights.
I think that was part of the
Yeah.
scandal.
The controversy.
Sort of scandal, controversy.
But there is controversy. People don't like restoration. And years ago, they used to do things that the new restorers try to fix, you know, because now they're really good at it. They have better material to use, more scientific. Anyone else? Yes?
Yeah, I have another one. I read a few years ago, maybe you're familiar with this, about how the weak point on the David is the ankle. I think it was in the Times or something. And they were very concerned because of earthquakes and such, that if something, if an earthquake happened, that the David would collapse. Because the ankle is a very weak point. It's the narrowest part and he's got all that weight on it.
I can see that. It makes me think one time a nutty guy walked in and hit the other foot with a hammer, and damaged it. But it's just came to my mind. But I think they're a little out of the way of the fault line. I don't remember other than the major flood in '66, which damaged a lot of things. The Arnold flooded, but I don't know if they get. All of Italy is seismic, so I don't want to say it wrong. All of Italy is prone to some kind of seismic activity, but it's not like down in Umbria. I don't remember any major earthquakes hitting Florence, but not that they couldn't get an earthquake. So I think that's a big concern. It's all a big concern, like not because when that happened in Umbria and Lazio, there so many churches and a lot of cultural property got damaged. So I mean, when those earthquakes hit, it's horrible. And it happened in Assisi, remember, and the Cimabue got ruined. But again, Umbria. But in St. Francis Cathedral, where the Giotto's in Cimabue, you're saying this angle here,
Yeah.
and he does have that stump, because he took that into mind, but I don't think he would have thought of earthquakes. A lot of things could happen if an earthquake hit right there, because things could fall from the ceiling too. And just like everything is vulnerable, the Duomo, the baptistry will be tragic. Yeah?
Did they find any research that he had, before he started on the execution of it, it took 4 years, but that he had it all laid out? He knew exactly what he was going to do up there?
I'm sure
Or
they
did it
made.
just sort of happen and evolved over 4 years?
I'm sure they made him show his plan. I'm sure they wouldn't have let him do something so important, especially, so he's claiming, remember, he was a sculptor. And this is really interesting because Julius II was not an easy guy to get along with. He was the warrior pope. He's the pope that led armies, right? And he commissioned Michelangelo to do his tomb. There was supposed to be like 40 figures, but it's Michelangelo. He never thought mediocre, so he overdid it. And he's getting paid too, so he sent him money home, but 40 figures and you're getting paid for but no one could have, he would have never finished them, right? So he's working on that, but then he even probably realized, now I'm a slave to this, I gotta do 40 figures, this is the Pope, the warrior Pope, right? But then the Pope interrupts his work. He wants to get this done now, right? But the Pope interrupts his work and says, I want you to do this. And he said, I'm not a painter. And Bramante, the architect, was his rival, didn't like him. And he swore, he thought, and it probably is true, that Bramante said, hey, why don't you get Michelangelo to do that? And there were artists doing things all over. And he swore Bramante did that because if Michelangelo denied the Pope, he's never going to get another commission again. He'd be in really bad standing. If he did it and failed, he looks like a fool. If he did something mediocre, So it was probably a setup, but it backfired because that's Michelangelo. So then the Pope, the whole tomb thing got put on hold, and he gives him his commission. But he said, I'm not a painter. He said, and then the Pope said, I want 12 disciples. So the same way, like, you want a tomb, I'll give you 40. You want 12 disciples? How about I do the entire Bible? Right? Yeah.
What was his relationship with Leonardo da Vinci at that time?
So Leonardo was the elder. Michelangelo was in the middle. Raphael was younger. He didn't get along with da Vinci. If you remember, they were going to have a competition with the battles, right? And the cartoons got made of these battles, but then they never actually did the frescoes. But they wanted to show who's better, me or him. They were rivals. Michelangelo was very competitive. Da Vinci was much more a gentleman, like Raphael. Like Da Vinci was more, he'd dress up, he'd go out, he'd meet people. Michelangelo was il terribile, they call him, the terrible one. He would get mad, he'd throw his hammer. So they didn't have a good relationship. But Da Vinci was out doing his own thing always, right? One day he's in Venice, one day he's in Milan. The end, he's off to France. He's doing science, he's doing botanical. And Michelangelo's whole life was art. And he's done some amazing things, even in architecture and sculpture, painting. And he lived to be almost 90, and he left a lot of work behind. There's only one Michelangelo drawing in America that I'm aware of. That's in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. It's a crucifixion. When they stole the works from the museum in 1990, they stole some Degas drawings from that room that were right next to the Da Vinci, the Michelangelo, and they didn't even know it was there. Thank God. That would be gone too. And there's only one Da Vinci that I'm aware of. That's Ginevra de Benchies. That's in the National Gallery. Beautiful little portrait. I don't think we have any others. Oh, maybe there's something in the French embassy. I think they believe they have a Michelangelo, a little Michelangelo sculpture in the French embassy in New York. I've never seen it. Come on, keep asking. I don't want this to end.
So you referred to, there's been certain periods of time where there was these explosions of creativity and, but they're spaced out pretty far.
Eruptions.
Eruptions of creativity. Do you think due to now with AI and digital and is that ever gonna happen again? Are we ever gonna see another explosion of this real art? Or is it everything just from this point on gonna be
I think that
something else?
I think that there's going to be a time when humanity says, we don't want this, we want that again.
Right.
Start making me
Well,
artwork.
people are thinking
I want
now,
the
but-
Tiffany glass. I want beautiful things. I want things made with people's hands. I think that they're going to want artists, sculptors. I don't think they'll ever stop. There'll always be a market now for that kind of thing, but and that'll come and go. But you'll always have people buying artist work. Right now in the market, it's not doing well, like everything else, but it'll come back. It's done this before, Prices went so high.
Mhm.
But there was many, I like art from everywhere. I like the mochi heads from Peru and the knock from Nigeria, Paris and from Courbet to the Surrealists from 1840 to the 1920s was another explosion, right? New York City from the 50s to now, right? You had all the galleries, all the artists. But what I'm saying is, I really think 3 volcanic eruptions of artistic output. No one, if you go to Italy, and in China too, there's 2 places, but when you're in Italy, just Greco-Romano, when you scratch the ground, you find things. They've got thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of those Greek pots because they were durable, they're finding them. They find 10,000 in one city alone, Etruscan city, 10,000 tombs. But there was many Etruscan cities. In the tombs there was so much artwork just from that period. And it ends up in all the museums, even in China, right? It's like, how do they get a Apulian vase, you know, from Apulia, and they don't really have a provenance. Thousands, and then there's so many artists that people don't really hear their names, you know. They just had a big show, Pisellino in England, but nobody really knew him. But unless you, like when you go to different areas, like in Le Marche or a city like Genoa, they all have their artists. And there'll be a lot of artists, and you don't really hear of them. There was so much art being made. There was so much production, so much, you know, output from these artist studios. That doesn't happen right now. Like, it just, Italy has so much artwork. You know, they say that it was that little peninsula is only about 0.5% of the landmass of the world, but it has 70% of the most significant art treasures of the world. It has like 58 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Boom, explosion. That's why it's a volcanic. That's why it kind of fits, because Italy's a volcanic peninsula. There's over 20 volcanoes. Some are still alive, but sleeping, and two erupt constantly. You know. And it's the same with the people. Maybe it goes hand in hand, you know, beauty and danger. You know, you live in a place that has earthquakes and volcanoes, but it has the best food, the best sunsets, the best water, and people that live big, you know, run from the volcano once in a while, but then make Davids, you know. Thank you.